If you can take your seats and we'll get started with our afternoon session. I think we may have some people coming in as we work through the process here, but I just want to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Age-Friendly Communities Workshop Seminar. We're pleased you all can be here and learn more about this topic. There's a variety of information regarding this topic that we have outside. Some of it's included in the pamphlet folder that you were given when you arrived. There's additional single copies of information some of that is highlighted on the information sheet of different resources that's in your packet. There's also individual outlines of some of the information that you'll be hearing today. In addition, there is a brief description of the economic benefits of age-friendly communities, and we will have an individual from Grantmakers in Aging out of Virginia joining us later today. She had some flight issues due to the storm, so she will be joining us within the next hour. Also, I'll just key you, there's an evaluation in there that we'll ask you to complete and drop off at the last table as you leave this afternoon. First off, I'd like to introduce Ginger Nieman from the South Dakota Community Foundation. She's program officer. The South Dakota Community Foundation has been a key player in this Grantmakers in Aging initiative that's been in South Dakota. So if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Grow South Dakota, for putting this important event on today. As Lori had mentioned, we are a partner of the Margaret Cargill Foundation and Grantmakers in Aging. We were approached by them a couple years ago now to be an intermediary partner with them to bring extra resources and dollars to South Dakota for the SOAR program, supporting older adults in rural communities. And it's been a great opportunity for us to find out more about those programs. We partnered with Margaret Sumption at Assumption and Weiland to help us contract and identify these organizations that are working in South Dakota. It's been a great partnership. These 4 groups have been doing phenomenal work, and you're going to hear more about them today. And I just thank you for the opportunity for us to be here and be a partner.
Thank you. So we'll kick off the afternoon with Eric Guy Kowski from the Sioux Falls AARP office. He joined AARP as the South Dakota State Director in March of 2016. He is a highly respected nonprofit leader specializing in volunteer leadership development, strategic staff deployment, and community engagement since the year 2000. Previously, Eric led the development and coordination of a statewide advocate network and partner organizations to successfully pass smoke-free legislation, multiple tobacco excise tax increase, and maintain state funding of tobacco and chronic disease prevention programs. He also developed strategic partnerships with medical, corporate, and public employers to enhance organizational priorities to improve the health of all citizens. Eric oversaw the collaborative efforts to increase engagements within South Dakota's diverse populations, as well as leadership board development and oversight. He holds a degree in political science from Northern State University, so he's familiar with Aberdeen. And he lives in Sioux Falls with his wife and 2 young daughters. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Lori. I'm just going to preface my opening comments with I've been fighting a sinus infection for the last week, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. I'm going to do the exact opposite of what presenters are supposed to do. I'm going to chew a little gum to keep things moving there. I'm going to drink a little coffee, and every once in a while I'll have to mute to scope. So I apologize to begin with, but as I had mentioned earlier this morning, I do have a fun Guy Kowski last name in growing up in Northeast South Dakota. My wife is from Rapid City, South Dakota, and she had never done much traveling around Northeast South Dakota other than to come to basketball games and volleyball games in Aberdeen and Watertown. So the first time I bring her home to Webster, South Dakota, she goes to the local movie store, and she says, well, she goes to rent a movie, and she's like, well, just put it under Carol Guy Kowski. That's my mom. Put it under Carol Guy Kowski's name, and the woman behind the register says, well, which Carol? And my wife, who's a Gunderson from Rapid City, is like, seriously? There's more than one Carol Guy Kowski in Day County? And she said, yeah, there's 3. So is it the one, well, Carol Guy Kowski in Webster. There's 2 in Webster. So now my wife's flustered because she doesn't know my home address. So she's like, well, so I'm sitting out in the car waiting. I'm like, what is going on? And so I had to come in and rescue her and say, 10th Avenue, Webster, South Dakota. And oh, that Carol Jean. So that's a Guy Kowski story in Northeast South Dakota. And everybody asked me if I can't remember who asked me this morning if I was related to the Guy Kowskis in Sisseton. And I'm like, yes, we are all related. There's just a whole lot of us in Northeast South Dakota. So I am related to every Guy Kowski. I don't necessarily associate with every one of those Guy Kowskis, so don't blame me for anything that somebody else did. But yeah, so growing up in Webster, I come to AARP with the mentality of wanting to make sure that the small towns across South Dakota are truly developed to their best potential. And one of the things that's been a really fun thing working with AARP is working with those older members that really care about their community, love what they're doing in their communities, and really being able to have us have resources that can help them make their communities better. And I think one of the pieces that I'm going to do in my presentation is show, especially the economic development folks in the room, how much the aging population really attributes to the local economic development in your communities. So I'm going to walk through some very technical details. Again, I'm the state director, so I get thrown into every issue known to man under the sun with AARP. AARP takes a position on every single topic, so I am not the expert. Lindsay Holmquist, my Associate State Director for Community Outreach, she is the expert for AARP South Dakota and South Dakota for Livable Communities. So I'm going to stick to my notes as best as I can because otherwise she's going to give me the stink eye from over there. So I'll be looking up, looking down, looking around, and I'm going to be going through a lot of pretty heavily detailed information. So if I know we have Q&A at the end, but if you have questions that I'm like 10 minutes into this thing and you guys are like, wow, that's really cool, can we just quickly talk about that? Please feel free to raise your hand. I'll take a question. So just ground rules, that's perfectly fine with me, okay? So like I said, I'm going to start with discussing kind of that importance of some demographic trends that are happening. And then some of the, one of the things that AARP that I didn't know before I came on board is we are one of the largest research organizations in terms of aging in America. Obviously we have, I shouldn't say obviously, we have 38 million members across America. So we have a very wide range of members, a really strong ability to communicate with those members. So when we do a survey to our membership, it really affects a large, it gets a really good sample of a large member of our population. We have state offices in all 50 states, including also the Virgin Islands, which I would like to be a state director there. That'd be pretty awesome. Guam, DC, and then I'm totally blanking on the third one. Anyway, it's another small, not technically a state, but Commonwealth, whatever. Puerto Rico, thank you. Lisi for the win. But yeah, so we have a lot, we've done a lot of expansion into our community program work. We really started state offices back in the late 90s. So we're doing even more community development with our volunteers out in those communities. So I'm going to start with some demographics. So as we know, the U.S. is getting older and more diverse. We're looking at, by 2015, there are going to be 18 million Americans over the age of 85. And as you can see, the minority population over the age of 65 is going to increase substantially as well. So not only are we getting older, we're also getting more diverse. So those are important demographics to realize here in the state of South Dakota, because that wave is also moving here as well. Now, in another slide, in a different presentation, this actual slide starts off with the slide on the left and then gradually transitions into the right slide. in the interest of time, I just put them both on the board. But as you can see, when you look at the dark purple counties, the darker the map gets, the older the counties get. So by 20% of the population age 65 by 2020, you can see the significant difference between 2010 and now soon to be 2020. So again, just another representation of the population aging significantly in our counties across the nation. So let's get into some specific demographics for South Dakota. As you can see, the light blue is 15 to 25% of the population that's over 50. 25 to 35% is the next lightest blue. 35 to 45% is the slightly darker blue. And then 45 to 55% of the population being over 50 in those counties. So my home county of Day County is one of those population, or one of those counties with a population of 45 to 55% over the age of 50. And as you can see on the slide to the right, you've got the demographics of the age groups. That top demographic is the 65 plus. Currently in 2015 represented about 15.8% or 15.7%. By 2040, that's going to be 18.2% of the population. And that next line is 20%, actually slightly decreased up to 18.7%, but that will represent 36.9% of the population will be 50 plus in America by 2040. So let's talk a little economic impact. As you can see on the slide, you've got a number of jobs that are impacted by the aging longevity economy. Obviously, education and health services are the two largest. The longevity economy is the sum of all economic activity in South Dakota that is supported by the consumer spending of households headed by someone over the age of 50. This includes the direct, indirect supply chain and induced economic effects of this spending. The induced impact involves the ripple effects from the spending of those employed either directly or indirectly. So the state GDP impact is $21.7 billion, or 45% of the total. Employment represents 284,000, or 48% of the total employment. Labor income, 12.9 billion, or 45%. And then state and local taxes is 1.5 billion, which represents over half of the local state and local taxes. So on this next slide, it talks a little bit about this $2.17 billion of impact on that longevity economy. It was driven by $15.7 billion in consumer spending by the over 50 households in South Dakota, which roughly estimates about 55% of total comparable consumer spending. The categories where local or longevity economy spending accounted for the largest share of total consumer spending were healthcare, which is about 65%, entertainment 55%, and utilities about 54%. So people over 50 also make a significant contribution to South Dakota's workforce, with 73% of people 50 to 64 still employed, compared to 83% of people 25 to 49%, or 25 to 49. So overall, people over 50 represent 35% of South Dakota's workforce. Among those employed people, 18% of those 50 to 64 are self-employed and entrepreneurs, compared with 11% of those 25 to 49-year-olds. Additionally, 38% of those 50 to 64 work in professional occupations, compared to 39% of those 25 to 49. So I think the key takeaway from this is that longevity economy is incredibly important to our economic development here in South Dakota, making sure that those people stay in our local communities. So now that's going to segue me into talking more about age-friendly communities, livable communities. But before I move into that, Lindsay's giving me the face again that she's going to hand out a handout that we've got, basically walk you through a lot of those slides that I just did. So as I mentioned, AARP does a number of surveys, a lot of research around our membership and the impact that they have on their communities. The biggest reason why we do a lot of research is it helps us advocate for laws, advocate community members to do more work within their communities, make their communities better. One of the recent surveys that we did was we conducted a survey of the 45 plus population, and participants were asked to respond to key statements. One of the key takeaways was over 3/4 of the 45 plus want to stay in their current residence as long as possible. And for the 65 plus, that number is 88%. So living at home, staying in your home, what you consider your home, is incredibly important to AARP membership, but anybody over the age of 45. The one thing that we'll notice on this slide is that most houses haven't been designed to adapt. American homes have traditionally been designed and built for able-bodied 35-year-olds. I know as somebody who's buying a new house myself, I know that the house that I'm buying is partially because I know I want to grow old in that house, so I know what I'm looking for. But right now we're building houses for able-bodied 35-year-olds, and we have a number of individuals that don't necessarily fit that segment. So it's important for us to be, when we think about housing in our communities, what housing is available for disabled, for older Americans, people with kids even. Those are the things that we need to be thinking about, and not just that 35-year-old individual that is able-bodied. We also notice that community members, if they cannot remain in their current homes, they at least want to remain in their local community for as long as possible. And again, as a small town boy in South Dakota, I am keenly aware of my older family members wanting to remain in Webster as long as possible, wanting to remain in Millbank as long as possible, wanting to remain in Britain as long as possible, and really looking for ways to stay in their community. And sometimes that's just not an option if services are not available. The reason why those members want to stay in their communities as long as possible is fairly obvious. It's family, friends, just that true connection to your community. So one of the things that we're looking at is, in order to allow residents to stay in their current community as long as possible, they need a community that has mixed-use development and multi-modes of transportation. Obviously, as folks age in South Dakota and they start to use healthcare services more, they need to be transported to healthcare facilities. We need to look at adopting better transportation services, being able to provide some of those services via telemedicine. We are looking at pioneering some telehealth legislation in South Dakota to improve access to telehealth across South Dakota and across the region as well. So I have on my notes here a fun fact. 1 in 5 drivers will be over the age of 65 by 2025 in the U.S. But our communities aren't really designed to support non-drivers. So you think of your communities, as people age, they're going to have to stay on the road longer if we don't take care of some of those community design needs. So the next slide talks a little bit more about the livability economy, people, places, and prosperity. This report was really created to help local leaders understand how livable community initiatives contribute to improved community-wide economic performance and guide your local discussions on how you can make your community more livable, and provides examples of how livability strategies contribute to economic vitality, and provided from communities across the country. The purpose of the Livability Report is to really drive change across America, helping local leadership invigorate ongoing communications with constituents, community stakeholders, and administrative departments. So livable communities we consider them good for people and for business. As you can see on the screen, a livable community really features housing choices that are suitable for people of all ages, and life states, reduces automobile dependence, supports socially vibrant public realms, integrates land uses so people can live closer within walking distance of jobs, community involvement, services that they might need. And then finally has transportation options that enable residents to get around even if they don't drive. So mixed-use property for livable communities, what's interesting is it actually generates higher tax revenue per acre than single-use property. Mixed-use development is an urban, suburban, or rural development, or even a single building that includes a combination of land uses, above or adjacent, where those functions are physically and functionally integrated, and that provides pedestrian connections. A study on property tax conducted in 9 jurisdictions in 4 western states show that a mixed-use property in livable communities generates more tax revenue per acre than the city and county single-use residential and commercial property. As you can see on the slide, it's a pretty significant bump up in terms of combining them into multi-use facilities. When we talk about, again, some other things that are livable communities good for people of business, some key findings: compactness really helps make a community more walkable, decreases automobile dependence, and supports socially vibrant public spaces. Integration of land uses really helps older adults live closer to or within walking distance of work, community activity, services. Housing diversity really helps ensure that appropriate housing is available for each stage of your lifespan. And then finally, transportation options, really looking for creating an independent, mobile, truly engaged community. Another slide about property values. Having a more compact community really increases the value of property. As you can see from communities that are working on it, Oakland, California has really worked on condensing. Property values have gone up 145%. A walk score increase of 1 point can improve the value of a home by as much as $3,000. And now when I think of, back to my hometown of Webster, South Dakota, a mile wide, so when we're thinking of things like Oakland, California, and we need to put it in our perspectives locally here too. So when we talk about that, it really means being able to get to your grocery store, being able to get to the hospital, being able to get to a community center, the community gardens. Where's Clear Lake in here? I love the idea of community gardens. Community gardens are awesome. So I love hearing that when we come to these meetings. So that's the idea of it, like really having those things all within walking distance of all community members. Some of the concepts of livable communities: create walkable and healthy communities, really investing in public transportation. And when we talk about investing in public transportation, we also want to talk about complete streets, making sure that the sidewalks are in good shape, really having just strong transportation functions across the board, not just thinking about cars. And this talks a little bit about transit-oriented development. Obviously, we're not going to have metros in Webster, South Dakota, but we can talk about having transit buses, paratransit buses, moving people around, protect housing affordability, and design for accessibility. So again, even at advanced ages, the vast majority of older adults, they're still currently living in their homes. Approximately 70% of adults 65 to 75 live in single-family, are single-family homeowners. So I know that graph is a little hard to read. Well, I'm a little colorblind, so it's a little hard for me to read, but yeah. So the bottom graph is single-family homeowners. So that's that bigger graph, and it goes under 50 on the left, 50 to 64 second from the left, 65 to 79 second from the right, and 80 and over far right. And then the next level, that little minuscule one, is multifamily homeowners, single family renters. Next level, multifamily renters, the next one, mobile home occupants, and then finally group quarters residents. So as you can see, the majority of the population is single-family homeowners, still well into the 80s and older. So what community amenities do older adults want close to home? Overwhelmingly, 50% want some sort of a transit option close to their home, whether it's a bus stop, whether it's a ability to be picked up by a Lyft service, some sort of public transportation close to their home. 47% want to be within 1 mile or less of a grocery store, and 42% want to be within 1 mile or less from a park. And the next, right below park, is pharmacy and drugstore. So when you think of your local communities, you want those 4 to really be within walking distance of most of your residents. I'm pretty sure the subway train, the 23%, they did not survey South Dakota about that. The one thing of note, everybody wants more livable communities. It's not just the boomers. It's not just the 50 plus, or the 65 and older. It really is everybody. And I as a Gen Xer, I'm always a little offended that we are never included in anything. Everybody cares about the millennials and the boomers, but really, truly, even the Gen X care about it. So 72% of boomers really want to be near shops, restaurants, and offices. Same with millennials, overwhelming majority. Would move into a smaller home for a shorter commute. 62% of boomers would like that, 49% of millennials. Folks that would prefer to live where there's a mix of homes, 42% boomers, 59% millennials, and then want that public transportation option. Over 50% on both of those segments.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
One of the things that is a common theme across all of the age-friendly communities is the issue of transportation. Has AARP investigated, or is there some research around how Ubers for seniors could be an opportunity for communities like the communities we find in South Dakota?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. Thank you. We are, and so we've been doing a lot of research into self-driving cars also, or autonomous driving vehicles. That is also looked at as a potential solution down the road as well, but we are doing research into how we can best coordinate transportation, because we also have a pretty good network of vehicles around the state that if we coordinated them better, if we use a 211 to coordinate transportation across the state, we could save a lot of resources that way. Where in Aberdeen, if you're driving from Aberdeen to Sioux Falls, call 211 and say, hey, I'm going, does anybody else need a ride? Is anyone else going to Watertown? And really truly being a more coordinated society of, so people don't have to have a vehicle or have ways of getting around.
I think we have to get beyond the minivan or the van. You know, I think we've had a lot of really, we've investigated opportunities for communities to have the community van that takes people back and forth to shopping and things like that. But my sense is that is not what's going to keep people feeling confident in their own homes in small communities. I think we really need to think differently about transportation, not say, oh, we can't fix that,
Right.
or it's too expensive to fix that, but we really need to look at a more organic solution, I think.
No, absolutely. And there's actually a company in Liberty Transportation out of Nebraska that's doing something very along the lines of Lyft and Uber with a model like that. In Yankton, yes. Yeah. So there definitely are those things happening. It's just a matter of going through some of the regulations that some cities might. I know Sioux Falls doesn't have Uber yet, doesn't have Lyft yet because of city ordinance. So there's those hurdles to get over as well. But I think in the next 5 years, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for autonomous vehicles, for the Uber, Lyft type of services. So I think we'll see those soon in South Dakota.
The good news is Sioux Falls is regulated heavily in a lot of other communities.
Not so much, yes. Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely a good thing.
We've got a big advantage over Sioux Falls.
Yes, absolutely. But thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. I'm encouraged by the progress that's happening in some of the other states along those lines. I think we'll see that in the next 5 years or so. So when we talk about a variety of housing choices in a walkable neighborhood, we're really looking for affordable housing that generates economic activity for local businesses. So when you think of like the two slides on the right, they represent a rural and a small town. When I think of our small towns in South Dakota, having those rentals or housing units above shops along Main Street. Everybody wants to revitalize your Main Street. The best way to do that is to have housing above those Main Street businesses. If you have that ability, that really impacts. We talk about having the big box stores come to town. What people really want to do is they want to have the ability to shop locally if they have that ability. So if you bring more people into your downtown, living downtown, you're going to be able to have your businesses downtown are also going to be able to expand as well. When you both have that combination of having people working and living in your really city core, that's really going to help your local businesses thrive. And they give some other suburban and urban, but I really think we focus on the rural and small town at this juncture. So the next slide is some investments in public transportation, providing savings costs. Again, it talks a little bit about some of that rural investment in transit, the transit between communities, things of that nature, and within communities. I foresee in the next year or two that we are going to spend more federally on transportation. We've had a pretty significant decrease over the last 6-7 years, so I think we're going to see an increase in transportation funding. So there should hopefully be some opportunities for some local initiatives to be increased, but also statewide as well. So a little bit more about that compact development promotes efficient land use, and it also reduces the cost of infrastructure investment. A study of 5 development scenarios from the Philadelphia region found that the cost of providing roads, schools, emergency services, and other vital infrastructure to new communities was in dispersed land use scenario is roughly $45,000 per household, but in a compact alternative, it's about $25,000 per household. So almost half of that household cost would be removed by just having a more compact development within land use. So when we think of, again, how we're expanding our communities, how we want to look at that compact model. So now to get to what Lori actually wanted me to talk about was our AARP's network of age-friendly communities. But I wanted to give you kind of that lay of the land of like what the impact is on that longevity economy on our local economic development. And so now what I'll talk about now is really about AARP's network of age-friendly communities, the support that we can provide communities as they move forward in that process, and really how we can look at other states to address some of the issues that we have in South Dakota. So the AARP network of age-friendly communities really is a 5-year cycle for the members that join on. The first 2 years is really about planning, really thinking about what your community needs, really what you envision for your community. The 3 to 5 years is really about implementation and then evaluating, and it's just because you get to that 5-year mark doesn't mean that you continuously don't try to improve. So it really is that first 2 years is critical about developing a plan, and then we move into that 3 to 5 years of implementation. The network, and I'll continue to go on here, the network really represents about cities across the nation. It really started in the northeast of the United States. And as you can see we've slowly started to expand out since 2012. We've got since April of 2012, we have 170 communities enrolled so far in over 38 states, which roughly impacts about almost 65 million lives. And then there's 8 states that have convened age-friendly summits, and then 1 planning for 2018. So I'm going to back up just one slide. So if you see Maine way up in the northeast corner, they've got a ton of stars there. They've got, when I talked to my counterpart out there, in January, she had 34 communities that were age-friendly, or part of the age-friendly network. Since I saw her last week in Washington, she had another 4 come on board. So she's up to 38 cities of age-friendly communities, which is amazing. But if you think of Maine, if you know Maine at all, it's a lot of geographic challenges, just like South Dakota. You've got a large population center, and then you've got many rural communities across the rest of the state. They have the same terrible winters that we do. They have the hot, humid, not as hot and humid as we get, but they have some very similar challenges that we have. So there's some place that we can go as a resource to say, well, how did you make this happen? How did you get these communities to get on board? How do we get buy-in from those communities? And really look at those communities. And it's not the Philadelphias, it's not the New York cities, it's the cities that are 1,000, 500, 3,000, 5,000. I mean, so it's truly a good representation of what we could be in South Dakota. So that's why I'm encouraged by all the folks that are in this room, the group of panelists that we have. I'm excited about what that means for South Dakota, because I really want some stars on that board. Because South Dakota, our team is really good our volunteers are amazing, our members are awesome, our community members are awesome. It's very seldom that we don't have a star on that board. So I'm hoping that we get a few stars in the next year or two. So some of the updates to the network of age-friendly communities, before I jump into the updates, what the network of age-friendly communities really does is it allows, and I'm going to say this again because I know it, Webster, city of about not quite 2,000 people. We, AARP, not me, because I'm not the expert on this, I told you this, but our experts on a national level will be able to put folks from Webster in contact with all the cities across the nation in that same demographic makeup. So a rural community, 2,000 population, hospital, grocery store, all within that community, and give examples of what other communities have done, what other communities, how it's benefited them, the plans that if somebody creates a plan, it's not meant for just that community. That plan can be shared out to whatever community makes the most sense for that in that time period. So that's probably the biggest reason if you're thinking of doing livable community work, age-friendly community work, it's important to join that network just for that. So when you're thinking of ideas like the community gardens in Clear Lake, other communities are doing that. How do you expand that across to other communities? How do you expand that to within your community? Things of that nature. So that's probably my biggest pitch for joining the network is for that reason alone. You also see survey and assessment guides. You have action planning guides, NAFC, Network of Age-Friendly Community Action Planning templates. There's a members-only Facebook group. Sounds very exclusive. There's quarterly webinars on how you can make your community more livable. There's that, again, that peer community matching. I think that's a huge resource. So you don't have to recreate the wheel every time. And then finally, we're looking at creating age-friendly states and territories. So I think those are all great additions to our lineup, and I think it's if you're thinking of doing this type of work in your communities, please consider joining. Please contact Lindsay. Lindsay, can you? And she can get you set up into that network and really help you develop that plan.
If I may say, I can add, it's not a difficult process to get involved in that. It truly is just, I have a copy here as an example. It's a very brief application. It also requires a letter of commitment from, your community leaders. Because although it does take involved citizens, of course, to get all of this done, there needs to be assurance that there needs to be proof, that the city, that the town is committed to making this happen as well. All of these resources are available, are helpful. There's no financial investment required to get involved in the network of age-friendly communities. But there may or may not be resources available through AARP, depending on what you're looking to do to help you make these things happen. This is all community-directed. The communities themselves determine the projects, the things that you would like to improve in your community. So although Eric is correct that, there are plans in place, there are other communities that have done things, you don't necessarily have to choose from the menu that's already available. You can say, this is what we need in our community. Does that make sense? Okay. Sorry, Eric.
I am.
I was sort of thinking outside the box and back on the transportation issue, and with this program then you could find communities of 1,000 people or whatever the community is comparing to that is using like golf carts and to get around, and what processes they had to go through to get the ordinances or to get, because I think that would be a nice transportation solution for some communities, is using golf carts instead of scooters. Those aren't as safe as a golf cart, but then
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this model, is that communities can identify that opportunity on their own. It's not a cookie cutter approach, but if you're a community that wants to do something, but you're just not coalescing around something, there are options out there for you to see those ideas.
Certainly. And specifically speaking to that, it's funny that you said that. I was just speaking to a colleague last week out of Florida, just comparing notes, just talking about ideas, and that exact idea is something that they have done in Florida. So we have a connection where you can maybe talk about what did it take to get that done. And also, I think when we talk about transportation, we have to think sometimes beyond our communities, right? Because there are smaller communities, maybe even in this area, where folks need to come into Aberdeen for certain things, for services, for medical appointments, whatever it may be. We actually have examples through, volunteers with AARP right here in our state. We had a great group in Hartford, actually, that put together a transportation option, worked with their city council, and got a little bit of funding from AARP to get a transit bus that routinely operates within the city limits of Hartford, but also brings people to Sioux Falls for those needs as well. And it's coordinated all through this group of volunteers in conjunction with the city. So there are opportunities to connect even with our neighbors here in South Dakota.
Thank you. So I'm looking at my iPhone, and it says that I am behind schedule, so I'm going to go through some stuff here quick so I can get some Q&A as well. So my next slide really talks about those 8 domains of livability. And I love the picture out on as we come in the door, because that's going to be actually my next slide. So Lori and I really partnered well to show up together. So what we consider for the 8 domains of livability, we call the built environment, which is outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, and housing. So those are things that are infrastructure, things that we build. You've got 3 that fall into that social environment, that social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation, and employment. And then finally, the other 2 that don't fall into those 2 environments is the community support and health services and that communication and information. So that's what we say are our 8 domains of livability. We've got specific ways to address some of those. When you think of the smaller rural towns in South Dakota, one of the things that AARP really worries about is that social inclusion and making sure that especially our members and the aging population is still being included in that social gatherings that are happening in the town and not really becoming isolated in their communities. So this is one that I really wanted to get to. The Livability Index. I have like 4 pages of notes just on this, but based on time, I'm not going to be able to get to that. But so the Livability Index is something that I don't know if anybody else in the U.S. has right now in terms of being able to have county level data on each county in America that shows you those 8 domains of livability and how your county or city stacks up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump out of my PowerPoint here. I'm going to actually pull up the website, and I'm going to put Aberdeen in there and see what it shows. So there's Aberdeen. So Aberdeen has a composite score of 63. And as you can see on the left-hand side, you've got housing, you've got neighborhood, you've got transportation, environment, health, engagement, and opportunity. So when you click on each one of those, so I'm going to click on housing. Okay, housing. So you can see what the housing breakdown within Aberdeen. So you've got, look at the bottom one, housing affordability, 129 units per 100 or 10,000 people. Median U.S. neighborhood, 124, so Aberdeen's actually doing better there. 13.1% of income spent on housing. Median U.S. neighborhood, 18.4, so Aberdeen's doing good there. Housing affordability, housing costs, 659 per month. Median U.S., 999. Housing options availability of multifamily housing, 35.1%. U.S. 18.8, so doing really well there. So as you can see, they break these down for all of the segments on the scores on the other side. So you can go in. If I had more time, I was going to have you all take out your smartphones and look up your own counties, but we're not going to do that. But I would just encourage you to take an opportunity and go to that. So you can just Google Livability Index AARP, and it'll come up. You can search. And the great thing about this is it gives your city council members, your economic development folks, your community leaders a way to show what their community might be lacking or what they're really good at. So if you want to develop a strength even better, you have that opportunity to say, oh, hey, Aberdeen already has 35%. We're already above the national average for housing options. How can we get even better? Or if there's something that we're lacking in, health. And I clicked on Webster for health, and I think we're all a little bit more, we eat a little bit too much than we should and don't exercise enough, and I'm guilty of it too. So I think that's why our health scores are lower. But so if you see a lower score, just know that there's reasons behind it, and there's things that you can work on as a community to get better. Questions before I move off of that? This is honestly, this is a really cool tool for you guys to use out in your communities. And again, these are the way that we score the livability index. Those 7 different scores within that eight domains. So engagement, opportunity, housing, neighborhood, transportation, environment, and health. And there's also a handy map overlay, so you're able to navigate the livability index a little bit better. Obviously, explains it better than I just did. And you can have, there's a mapping feature that shows like around the county or around the city, different segments of that area. So it's an incredible tool. So then finally, and I promise you, Lori, I'm gonna get to some Q&A. Just moving beyond that livability index and really working with your local county elected officials, your community elected officials, really looking at ways to apply that data to your specific community, whether it's a nonprofit organization, a community advocate, AARP member, how you develop your real estate market, or county staff, city staff, whatever. So I'm going to leave it at this, 5 things to do and not to do. So don't assume that changes have to be costly, because they don't have to be costly. And don't just build a senior center. Plan just for one age group. View older people as a drain. And don't ignore pedestrians and design just for cars. What you do want to do is reach out to your residents. One of the things that we do as AARP staff, whenever we have an AARP event, we always have a listening post because we want to know what our members want. It's critical for you guys to do the same thing out in your communities, making sure what your community members want as well. Do bring in other funders and partners. Do recognize the value of 50+ residents. Do borrow ideas from others, again, back to the network of age-friendly communities. And do understand that small changes can make a huge difference. With that, I will open it up to questions. Lindsay, did you bring?
Yes.
So every year AARP produces a magazine called Where We Live. It gives 100 different ideas of things that are happening out in communities across America. That we have enough copies. Okay. So if you would like a copy of this, talk to Lindsay, and we've got a new one coming out in September. But it's a really cool short read that gives you ideas of things that people are doing across America. So again, I'm just put this up there, and I think Lindsay, you have these for handouts for with the website that we want folks to go to. With aarp.org/livable, or you could search aarp.org/age-friendly, or just contact Lindsay. Probably contacting Lindsay is probably your best bet. So with 8 minutes to go, questions. I gave you a lot of information, and I apologize. But if you would like to have a discussion later, Lindsay and I will be around, and we'd be happy to help you in any manner to get your communities to be age-friendly, livable communities. So, thank you.
There's truly a wealth of information on their AARP website that I had never been on before we got involved in this project. And the Livable Communities was one that really caught my attention, and I went, whoa, this is really cool. I didn't know it even existed. So that's one of our really efforts with this, is to let people know that resource is out there, it's available. And even though you're over 50 like I am, you don't have to be afraid to go on the AARP website and let people know that you're actually looking at this stuff. Because it's there, it's out there, it's very real, and it's very beneficial to all of us as we work in the communities.